Well, hi and welcome back to my Christian channel. Back in about 2015 it was, I'll read some of this stuff off the screen. Back in about 2015 I was nearing 70 and I wrote on my blog some thoughts on nearing 70. I'm just going to share a little bit of that as a preamble to what I will go into after that. So here we go. And at the time I said, I have now started this year my 70th year. Truth of the matter is, I'm getting close to 75 now. So you look back and you think, where did that time go? I can still remember vividly, most vividly, the things of my childhood, my teenage years, young adult and married years, years as a new parent, the struggles and joys of family and working lives, and the list goes on. In retirement, I regularly meet with friends who are about the same age as me for coffee. We are mostly all retired from the workforce. Well, we are now. That back then, not all of us were, but we are now, well and truly. We have a great time once a month reminiscing over coffee. We sort out the problems of particular sporting teams. We crack terrible dad jokes. I'm probably the most guilty. And occasionally touch on serious world issues. A great time not to be missed if we can help it. We all try and get there if we can. Occasionally we mention people who have been close to us who have died or have had a serious illness. One of our close friends never made it to our coffee group. He died quite a few years ago now. And as I wrote at the time, just that week I received a phone call from a friend who will be 70 this year. And he informed me a couple of months ago that he'd had 2 heart attacks. Thankfully he's on the mend after operations. He's still going, so that's good. Some of us we are at an age where we enjoy life very much, albeit the aches and the pains. Some of us have had and still have serious health issues. I have lately much thought about my dad who died when he was 70. He retired, had an operation, heart bypasses, was just recovering from that when he was diagnosed with stomach cancer. As I approach his age, I have many thoughts about his life and mine, and the realisation that life is very short, on this earth anyway. What might come after prompts this post. Most of us try to ignore the fact that we will die. Some of us are just resigned to our fate and think whatever will be, as it says in the song. As a Christian, I believe at this age, if we have never thought much about it before, we should be now. If heaven and eternity exist, we need to think about it now if we haven't done so before. Time is growing short. In fact, if it hadn't been for modern medicine, I probably would have gone the way of my dad not long after I wrote this. But I'm still here because of medical science. I'm going to read from a book, and I've lots of these books. I read from one the other day, and this is a book on heaven, and I may, as I go through these videos, read the whole lot and make it available for you to read online anyway, the whole book. This has never been published in a book publishing place. You'll never find it in a Christian bookshop. It was just done for Christian people to use in their churches. So here are some random thoughts for those near 70 and over. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is that looking at my analytics on my main YouTube channel, I find that a lot of the people watching that channel are in the older age group, and most of them are men. So perhaps you're a man, or a lady for that matter, approaching 70 or beyond. And you need to listen to some of this and think about it seriously. Just this last week, in fact earlier this week, a friend of ours who was the same age as my wife has died. And once again it brings you back to a reality. So, this is what the author said at the time. I chose to write these random thoughts on heaven for those over 60 because the biggest proportion of their living is behind them, and the next really big event for them will be their passing from this life to the next. If one happens to be 5 or 10 years older than 70, then that event is so much closer. As we move into the middle 70s, we shall have to come to terms with the fact that we have had our go at life. We control less and less, we may influence less and less, and we may find ourselves living in a world strange and different from the world we grew up in and in which we had our heyday. Much of the current world, when this author wrote this, it was before computers and social media and everything had really taken over. Much of the current world may seem incomprehensible to us. We have little or no interest in computers, fax machines and a whole stack of modern technology. To tell those of us who are 75 we ought to set goals for our lives may be said with persuasive enthusiasm, but will be received usually with cold indifference. We prefer to live going over wonderful times in our lives, thinking of those who are very important to us and who maybe we loved very dearly in days now long gone. All of this with a secret hope we will not yield to the temptation to bore our loved ones and remaining friends or newer acquaintances by endlessly talking about wonderful days, which for us now are in a dead past and which mean little or nothing to our listeners. Like it or not, we've had our go at life. Not always easy to come to terms with, and the next big event is for us to pass from this life to the next. Just turn that a little bit around there. Time is the next heading. What is heaven like? The truth is, there are all sorts of questions one would like answers to, but too many questions, there are not any, not here in this life. One thing, for instance, what does one do in heaven all the time through eternity? And some have jibed at this, saying they do not want the boredom of a heaven that stretches into an endless eternity. That question, of course, is born of this earth. Without realising it, we have transposed what we know in this earth to what we do not know about life after this. If we are talking in terms of heaven, two things may be wrong in that question. Two things we may not at first recognise. The first is we use the word time. We thought of eternity in terms of what we live and move and have our being in here on earth, time. In heaven, we have entered into another existence where God is. And with God, there is no such thing as time, only an eternal now. And of that, we know nothing. Doing is the next heading. In our question, we also asked, what shall we do in heaven? Again, we may have mistakenly transposed what we know in this life to the next. Here in this world, we place extraordinary and immense importance on doing. You only got to look at all the YouTube channels and you see what people are doing. Some of us spend all of our time trying to cram into each day as much doing as we can. We do. We overprogram ourselves. We overwork ourselves. And we secretly despise those who do not. Doing is an idol with us, but you would never get us to admit it. It is a sacred cow which no one must touch, criticise or object to. But in heaven, it may be just possible there is a switch from all this exaltation of doing. Doing may not get any rating at all in heaven. Of all things there, it may be of least importance. The switch may be from doing to being. Being what we were always intended to be until a terrible thing called sin came into the world. It came along and switched us all off course. The trouble is, many of us know far too little about being what God intended we should be. And all too often, here in this world, we do not give it a high priority. In heaven, being may be at the head of the list. Perhaps by the time we are 70, we will begin to see with greater clarity that in preparing for heaven, to be is much more important than to do. Proof is the next heading. Proof. What is proof? We are great ones for wanting things proved to us before we will believe. I remember our old principal in his logic class 60 years ago, this is when this writer was in a Bible college, saying in his logic class, he was saying, "Gentlemen, I can prove it, but I cannot prove it to you." There you go. There was a profound understanding of human nature in that statement. You see, one's prejudices and attitudes and presuppositions and other things may be very much stronger in determining what we believe than any proof that can be offered. Further, there are more kinds of proof than scientific proof, such as I will believe it when I see it. There are more ways of knowing than by the knowledge that comes to us through our senses. When someone asks for proof that there is a heaven, they may be asking, if it is a genuine question, a nonsensical question. The question may not be as smart as the asker thinks. For the Christian, belief and faith play an immense part in his knowing what he might otherwise be quite ignorant of. We need to recognise faith is not what the little boy said it is, believing when you know it ain't true. Everybody, Christian or not, uses faith all day long, and a lot of what we know is based on the faith we use all day long. All the Christian does is extend his faith into a world beyond and above this world, the supernatural world. Proof. What is proof? We may think we have arguments that are unassailable, and therefore our conclusion cannot be challenged. It is beyond disputation. But then when we live on a few years and discover the premises on which we based our argument are suspect, and the proof we thought beyond challenge has a bad wobble in it. If someone says to me, "I do not accept there is a heaven," my reply may well be, "You do not accept my belief in heaven, but then you cannot prove there isn't a heaven. So the score is 1-1, but not quite." If my friend who says there is no heaven is right, then when we both come to the end of this life, we both pass into nothingness. But if I am right about there being a heaven, when we come to the end of this journey, I shall go to heaven and he will not. He cannot win and I cannot lose. But enough of these tomfool semantics is what my friend Frank says. Heaven is much too important than to indulge in these sort of goings on. Given there is a heaven, and I have not the shadow of a doubt there is, what is it like? To answer that question, I must go to the New Testament, and even then there may be many questions we would like answered, but fortunately or unfortunately cannot be answered until we have arrived in heaven itself. Before we can look at what heaven is like, there are one or two prior matters we should think about. They are dying and death. Many people do not want to think about these two. They regard it as morbid or even frightening. But think about them or not, they are inevitable for us all. And it is much better if we can to get a healthy, robust attitude to both, rather than have a morbid fear of them, skulking away in some troubled recess of our mind. Dying, the next heading. A few observations may be in order. Some fear dying, and not without cause, more than death itself. Some appear to live as if death can happen to everyone else but themselves. Some who are scared stiff of the thought of death, and for some reason or other will not think of it, seem to have the attitude that somehow, when the time comes, everything will turn out all right. others trying to help us face our own death, whenever that may be, tell us death is a natural part of life. Is death a natural part of life? Possibly, for some at least, they have little trouble with this last statement. It seems to depend on what we think is the other side of death. Even at the age of 70, many feel that they are only arriving at the zenith of many of their powers, and they could go on and on. It is only their body that has worn out. If I was fitter than I am now, I'd still be doing wedding photography, but there's no way I'm capable of physically photographing a wedding anymore, not for the whole day anyway. So now they are 70, right at the peak of their powers. Everything stops with death. That is, if there is nothing beyond this life. But if the Christian view of life and death and the hereafter is the right one, then death is a necessary gateway into a much fuller and expanded life, not possible to live on this physical world of life bounded by our humanity. I'm going to stop there. I will read some more of that book as I continue to make videos for this YouTube channel, this Christian one. Have a look back to my blogs. If you go back on the link here, back to my main YouTube channel, you'll find some links to my blogs. The main blog that I have, plus the one that says Going Deeper with God. And just in the index, particularly on the main blog, just look at the word heaven and type on that. And then you will find a lot of messages that I have preached in churches at times and other information on heaven. And I will make that clear on the Christian process as we go through this channel to share with you what I believe and many others believe is the way to have eternal life, the way to go to heaven, the way to have all of our sins forgiven. So I hope this has stimulated your thinking today, particularly if you're in the age group that I'm talking about, but even if you are younger. I was actually 28 when I think I said before, when I became a Christian, and I'm still here. So thanks for watching, and God bless you, and I hope to see you next time. And please offer comments or ask questions. Someone has already asked me a question on my introductory YouTube channel, and I encourage you, if you have questions. I don't have all the answers, but I know God does. I know the Bible does. And some of them, as we've just been hearing here, we won't know some of the answers until we actually go to heaven. But we can know that we can go there and know a lot more about our salvation, is the word that some people use, before we come to this end of this life. In fact, it's essential to know about it and act on it before we come to the end of this life. So I'll see you next time.